Beckett Hale had everything a man could dream of: unimaginable wealth, his face on Forbes covers, a penthouse that kissed the clouds of Manhattan, and the kind of influence that turned boardrooms silent the moment he entered. But despite the power, the legacy, and the headlines, Beckett found himself staring into the mirror each morning, asking the same question: why does it all feel so empty? His fiancée, Caroline Whitmore, was New York royalty. Elegant, poised, and magazine perfect, she came from a lineage where love was arranged like business deals and emotions were accessories worn only at charity galas. At first, her presence had thrilled him. She was intelligent and stunning, a vision in pearls and designer gowns. But lately, something about her felt hollow. Her laughter never reached her eyes. Her kisses felt like polite obligations. Their conversations had grown shorter, colder. Her phone buzzed more often than she looked at him. Beckett wasn't paranoid. He was observant, and he'd learned long ago that intuition wasn't something to ignore. There were whispers behind closed doors, quiet exits from events, a sudden obsession with business trips that didn't line up. When he asked her questions, Caroline smiled and deflected with charm. But Beckett knew that beneath her polished smile, something was shifting, something that made his chest tighten with dread. Tired of second-guessing his own instincts, Beckett made a decision no one in his world would ever understand. He needed truth, raw and unfiltered, not the manicured version people showed the billionaire. So he crafted a second identity: Ben Rivers, a quiet, blue-collar chauffeur. With forged papers and a vintage car that smelled of oil and leather, he applied for a job at the Willow and Ash, a popular upscale restaurant in Brooklyn where the city's elite mingled with the struggling dreamers of New York. The first time he stepped into the restaurant's backlot as Ben, wearing a worn leather jacket and scuffed boots, Beckett felt strangely alive. No one recognized him. No one bowed or offered champagne. He was invisible, and it felt like freedom. And that's when he saw her. Delilah Rose walked out of the employee door, balancing 3 trays and laughing at something one of the chefs shouted behind her. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that turned the air electric. Long, honey-blonde hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, and her lips, painted in a subtle rose hue, curved into a smile that wasn't rehearsed. It was genuine, warm, real. Her uniform hugged her curves, but it was the fire in her eyes that stopped Beckett in his tracks. That, and the way she looked like she belonged in a world he'd only just started to see. She caught him staring and raised a curious eyebrow. "You the new driver?" she asked, cocking her head. Beckett nodded, adjusting his hat to shade his face. "Ben," he said simply, extending a hand that trembled more than it should have. "First day." "Delilah," she replied, shaking it with a firm grip that contradicted her delicate fingers. "Don't let the chefs scare you. They bark louder than they bite." That was it. A moment, nothing more. But it rooted itself in Beckett's chest like a spark catching fire. Over the next few days, Beckett kept his disguise airtight. He listened more than he spoke, learning the rhythms of a world far from Wall Street and luxury penthouses. And every day, Delilah shined brighter. She remembered people's birthdays, laughed at the worst jokes, and handed over her last $20 to a dishwasher whose rent was short. She was magic in motion, a whirlwind of compassion and resilience. And Beckett found himself rearranging his schedule just to be near her. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't treat him like a golden ticket. To her, he was just Ben, the quiet driver with tired eyes and gentle manners. And for the first time in years, Beckett felt seen, not for what he had, but for who he was beneath it all. But the irony wasn't lost on him. To find something real, he had to become someone fake. As Caroline's absence grew louder in his life, Delilah's presence filled the silence. And though Beckett told himself this was just a mission to uncover the truth about his fiancée, his heart was already pulling him in a different direction, one he couldn't afford to follow, one he couldn't stop chasing. Delilah Rose had learned early in life that people only saw what they wanted to see. As a waitress juggling 2 jobs while caring for her younger sister, she had mastered the art of keeping her head down, avoiding confrontation, and making herself invisible to the world that too often treated her like an afterthought. Her days blurred into one another, long hours, endless smiles, and the constant hum of polite conversations with customers who didn't really care about her story, her struggles, or the weight she carried. But Ben, the new chauffeur, was different. From the very first ride, Delilah noticed it. There was something in the way he listened, not just to her words, but to the pauses in between them. He wasn't the typical guy who made small talk or tried to impress her with expensive jokes or clever remarks. He didn't stare at her like the other men did, eyes lingering too long as if they could claim her simply by looking. No, Ben just listened. His eyes were kind, curious even, as if he genuinely cared about the small details of her life, the things that made her who she was. He remembered the little things. "Vanilla latte with extra foam, right?" he asked one morning as he slid open the car door with a practiced ease. Delilah blinked in surprise. "How did you— You mentioned it last time. Thought I'd make sure it was perfect today," he said with a soft smile that reached his eyes. There was no smugness, no hint of self-satisfaction, just a quiet, simple kindness. She smiled, her lips curving into something real. "Thanks, Ben. You're a good driver." And for the first time in weeks, she felt like someone truly saw her, not as the tired waitress struggling to make ends meet, but as a person with thoughts, dreams, and preferences. It wasn't just the coffee, though. It was the way he hummed along to the radio, hitting the high notes of Taylor Swift's Blank Space in a slightly off-key way, but with a heartwarming earnestness. It was the way he asked about her day, never rushing, always listening, letting her speak as much or as little as she wanted. With Ben, she felt heard. In a world where people rarely took the time to notice, he noticed her. Meanwhile, Beckett, hidden behind the mask of Ben, found himself tangled in a web of emotional confusion. He had originally taken the job to learn about his fiancée's true nature, but he hadn't expected the effect Delilah would have on him. Every interaction with her felt like a lifeline, a balm to the growing dread that consumed him every time he thought of Caroline. Caroline, the woman who was supposed to be the love of his life, the woman who had once made him believe that their union was meant to be, a match made in socialite heaven. But lately something had shifted. A chill had settled between them, and he could feel her pulling away in ways he couldn't quite explain. It was late one evening when Beckett stumbled upon the truth he had been desperately avoiding. He had set up hidden cameras in his penthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of Caroline's unguarded moments when she thought he wasn't watching. What he saw shattered him. In the footage, Caroline was sitting at a sleek bar with none other than Nolan Carr, his closest business partner. The conversation started innocently enough, small talk about investments and upcoming meetings, but it quickly escalated. Caroline's laughter sounded forced at first, but then, as Nolan leaned in a little too close, her laughter turned flirtatious. She touched his arm, eyes twinkling with something Beckett hadn't seen in months. Genuine interest. Her lips lingered too long against Nolan's ear as she whispered something, and Beckett could feel the knot in his stomach tighten with each passing second. The worst part? Caroline's eyes, those eyes that used to be filled with affection for him, were now sparkling with a passion Beckett hadn't witnessed in far too long. And Nolan? He had been a constant presence in Beckett's life, a trusted friend and business confidant. But here on the screen, he was a different man, one who had crossed a line Beckett never expected. Beckett slammed his fist against the desk, unable to tear his eyes away from the betrayal unfolding on the screen. The sting of it all was suffocating, but strangely, each moment he spent with Delilah felt like a reprieve, a brief escape from the turmoil in his own life. He had never felt so torn. On one hand, there was Caroline, the woman he had thought he would spend his life with, the woman who now stood on the precipice of betraying him in the worst possible way. And on the other hand, there was Delilah, the waitress with a heart of gold and an authenticity that was impossible to ignore. Every time he saw her, every ride they shared, it was like a piece of him was waking up again. He had built walls around his heart long ago, but Delilah made them feel like fragile, crumbling bricks. She didn't need to know who he was, didn't need to see his wealth or his status to see him, and that was a gift he hadn't known he needed until now. But as the days passed, the weight of his double life grew heavier. He couldn't continue pretending to be someone he wasn't. He couldn't continue lying to Delilah about his true identity. And yet the truth about Caroline gnawed at him, like a wound that refused to heal. It was the drive home that night, through the winding streets of Brooklyn, with Delilah in the passenger seat, laughing softly at something he'd said, that Beckett knew, deep in his heart, that his life would never be the same. He had come into Delilah's world as a stranger, a man hiding behind a mask. But as the miles passed between them, the walls between them began to crumble. And for the first time in a long time, Beckett allowed himself to dream of a life that didn't involve status, wealth, or betrayal, just real, raw, untarnished love. The storm came out of nowhere. The skies, once clear and bright, darkened in an instant, with clouds so thick they seemed to swallow the last traces of sunlight. Beckett stood by the window of his penthouse, watching the rainfall begin in sheets, beating against the glass like a million tiny fists. It was almost as if the heavens themselves had mirrored his mood. Heavy, oppressive, filled with a storm that threatened to break at any moment. He had been looking forward to dinner with Carolyn. It had been days since they shared a quiet evening together, just the two of them, away from the prying eyes of New York's social elite. But that night, Caroline had called in a last-minute cancellation. "I'm not feeling well," she had said, her voice clipped, distant. "I think I'll just stay in tonight, Beckett. We can reschedule." His stomach twisted, a cold sensation spreading through him, but he didn't question her. He had learned a long time ago that pushing Caroline for answers only made things worse. So instead, he had let her go with a vague promise of catching up soon. But something didn't sit right. As the hours passed, Beckett found himself unable to shake the feeling that he was being lied to. The nagging sense that something was wrong, something he was missing, wouldn't leave him alone. And then his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was a picture, a blurry snapshot of Caroline and Nolan Carr walking into a luxury spa suite, laughing in the rain. The caption simply read, "Looks like Caroline's not so sick after all." Beckett's pulse spiked. His first instinct was disbelief. But then, as the reality of the situation sunk in, a crushing anger swelled in his chest. His hands gripped the phone tighter, the screen dimming in his palm as he took in the image. Caroline, the woman who was supposed to be his future, was in the arms of the one person he had trusted most, Nolan, his business partner, the man who had betrayed him more than he could ever imagine. He didn't need to see anymore. He didn't need to follow them into the suite. The truth was there, staring back at him, plain as day. But instead of confronting them, Beckett did something he didn't expect. He left. He put on his coat, stepped out into the storm, and drove. He didn't know where he was going at first, but as he drove through the rainy streets of New York, his thoughts kept circling back to Delilah. His heart pounded with an urgency he hadn't felt before, a pull towards her that had only grown stronger in recent days. And then, like some kind of cosmic alignment, fate guided him to her. At a bus stop, soaked through and shivering, Delilah stood waiting for the next ride home. Her honey blonde hair clung to her face, and her delicate frame seemed swallowed by the downpour. She didn't have an umbrella, and her uniform, soaked and clinging to her skin, left her vulnerable to the harsh wind. Beckett's heart clenched at the sight. Without thinking, he pulled up to the curb and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he called, his voice barely audible over the storm. Delilah looked up startled, her eyes widening in recognition. "Ben? What are you—" "Delilah, you're drenched. Let me drive you home," Beckett said, his voice soft but insistent. He couldn't explain why he was doing this, why this moment felt so different, but he couldn't leave her out in the rain. Not now. Without hesitation, she stepped into the car, and Beckett immediately felt a warmth fill the space between them, a quiet comfort in the storm. The hum of the engine was the only sound for a long moment as they drove through the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn. Delilah didn't say much at first. She was too tired, too cold from the long shift and the wetness that seemed to seep into her bones. But as the car continued on, she let out a quiet sigh, rubbing her arms to warm herself. Beckett couldn't help but glance at her, taking in the way she sat, eyes fixed on the raindrops splattering against the window, her lips slightly parted as if she were trying to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. "You know," Beckett began, his voice low, tentative, I never understood how you managed to juggle everything. Two jobs, your sister. Delilah turned to him, her expression softening. It's not easy, but you do what you have to do, right? Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of years of responsibility that Beckett could barely fathom. I take care of my sister. That's what matters most. Beckett nodded, his throat tightening. He didn't know why he was telling her this, why her words resonated so deeply with him. He had his own wealth, his own empire, and yet he'd never felt more lost than he did in that moment. Delilah, real, genuine, full of purpose, made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of clarity. Their fingers brushed as he handed her a napkin, and in that fleeting touch, something shifted. Beckett's breath caught, and Delilah's heart skipped a beat. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a spark between them, a chemistry neither of them could deny. Neither of them spoke about it, but the tension in the car thickened, pulling them closer without a word. The silence that enveloped them was comforting, yet heavy, as if they were both silently acknowledging the bond that had formed without either of them intending for it to happen. Beckett's eyes never left the road, but his mind wasn't on the driving. It was on Delilah, the way she fit so naturally into the quiet of the car, the way she was, for a moment, just another person, a woman who had no idea who he truly was, who didn't care for his wealth or his title. And as they drove through the rain, Beckett felt something new taking root in his chest, something stronger than curiosity, something that felt dangerously close to desire. When they finally reached her apartment, Delilah thanked him softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Thanks, Ben," she said, her eyes lingering on his for a moment too long. "I really appreciate it." Beckett gave her a nod, his heart still pounding in his chest. He didn't trust himself to say anything more. Instead, he simply drove away, the weight of everything pressing down on him, the truth about Caroline, the lies, the betrayal. But in the back of his mind, Delilah lingered, her smile, her warmth, her presence pulling him back into the quiet of a life he never expected. As he left the apartment building behind, Beckett knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening between him and Delilah was only just beginning. The days blurred together for Beckett, caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and secrets that were beginning to weigh heavily on him. Every time he saw Delilah, it was like a fresh breath of air, a stark contrast to the suffocating world he'd been living in. But with each passing moment, his internal battle grew more intense. How could he keep up this charade, this lie with Delilah, while he was engaged to Caroline, the woman who was supposed to be his future? As much as he longed to tell Delilah the truth about who he really was, he feared the consequences. She didn't know that Ben, the chauffeur she'd come to trust, was Beckett Hale, a billionaire who was supposed to be marrying one of New York's most influential women. And yet, every time they were together, it felt more impossible to keep up the facade. It was in moments like these, sitting next to Delilah on quiet car rides, her laughter echoing through the car, her eyes sparkling with dreams, that Beckett felt torn between two worlds. One that was expected of him, the world of wealth and power and superficial smiles, and the other that was completely unpredictable, chaotic, and raw. Delilah was nothing like Caroline, nothing like anyone he'd ever been with. She was real, unafraid to be herself. There was something magnetic about her, something that made Beckett feel like he was finally seeing the world through fresh eyes. Delilah had told him little about her life, but one night, after another long day at the restaurant, she opened up to him in a way that surprised them both. They were sitting in the car, waiting for the rain to die down before heading home. The night had been unusually quiet, the usual chatter of the city muffled by the storm. Delilah, tired but grateful for the quiet, finally spoke. "I never told you much about my family, did I?" she began, her voice softer than usual. "Not that it matters. I don't want your pity." Beckett looked at her, his gaze tender. "You don't have to tell me anything, Delilah, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Delilah gave him a small, shaky smile, her fingers brushing through her wet hair. "I don't know if you'll understand. My father left when I was little. We never heard from him again. My mom, she was all I had. She worked 3 jobs just to make ends meet. She paused, her eyes growing distant, lost in the memories. Then when I was 18, she passed away. It was just me and my sister after that. Beckett felt the weight of her words settle in the car, thickening the air between them. He could hear the sadness in her voice, the years of pain and sacrifice. It made his heart ache in a way he couldn't explain. Delilah had given up so much of herself to take care of her sister. She'd put her dreams on hold, dreams of going to college, of becoming something more than just a waitress, something more than the life she had inherited. I gave up college, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. I couldn't leave her. She's all I've got now. Beckett's chest tightened. He wanted to say something to make it better, to fix her pain, but he knew he couldn't. How could he? His life was so far removed from hers. Money, status, endless opportunities. He couldn't possibly understand the depth of what she'd endured. But in that moment, as she told him about the sacrifices she had made, something inside him shifted. Beckett realized that it wasn't pity he felt for Delilah. It was admiration. She was strong, resilient, and selfless in a way he had never been. He had grown up with everything he could ever want. Yet here was this woman, battling the world with nothing but the love for her sister. I don't know how you do it, he said quietly, almost to himself. You're incredible, Delilah. She glanced at him, her blue eyes meeting his. I don't have a choice, but you don't need to feel sorry for me. I'm just doing what I have to. A comfortable silence fell over them, but Beckett could feel the bond between them deepen. Every moment with her made him more conflicted, more unsure of where his heart truly lay. He thought of Caroline, of the woman who was supposed to be his future, the woman he had promised himself to. But the more he learned about Delilah, the more he felt like his life with Caroline was a carefully constructed lie. A world built on expectations and obligations, not love. With Delilah, it was different. Everything felt genuine, raw, real. The next day, Caroline's behavior became even more suspicious. She had been distant lately, but now she was paranoid, watching his every move with an intensity that Beckett hadn't noticed before. Caroline insisted on joining him for every business meeting, demanding to know why he had been spending so much time with Ben, the mysterious chauffeur. What's so special about him? Caroline asked one night, her eyes narrowing as she watched Beckett from across the table. Why does he get to be alone with you so much? Beckett froze, his mind racing. He knew Caroline had never truly liked the idea of him working in the restaurant, interacting with the staff. But this was something new. Her jealousy was palpable. Caroline, he began, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. He's just a driver. It's nothing. You're imagining things. But Caroline wasn't convinced. Her suspicions grew, and she began following him more closely, demanding answers Beckett wasn't ready to give. And yet, as much as she pushed, Beckett couldn't bring himself to confront Delilah. He couldn't risk losing her, especially when everything with Caroline seemed to be falling apart. By the end of the week, Beckett found himself caught in a whirlwind of guilt and confusion. Caroline's paranoia was suffocating him, but the more he learned about Delilah, the more he wanted to be with her. He couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't tell her that he was the man she would never expect. But with every ride, every moment spent with her, the truth became clearer in his heart. Delilah was not just the woman he wanted to protect. She was the woman he wanted to love. But that love came with a price that would cost him everything. The city lights flickered like diamonds in the distance, casting a soft glow over the streets as Beckett drove through the quiet city at night. The car hummed along the road, the sound of the engine the only thing breaking the silence between him and Delilah. They had just finished their shift, and the city was beginning to settle into its late-night rhythm, silent and peaceful, but not for the two of them. Delilah sat beside him, her eyes thoughtful, her face illuminated by the pale light outside. There was something about the way she looked tonight, her hair cascading around her face, her lips slightly parted as if she had something on her mind. Beckett noticed every detail, as he always did when he was with her. As they neared her apartment, Beckett slowed the car, knowing she wasn't quite ready to say goodbye. She had been quieter than usual tonight, something that gnawed at him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her this distant, as though there was a wall she was building up between them. Finally, Delilah broke the silence. "I don't know why I'm always so guarded," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I guess it's hard to trust anyone anymore. People always leave. Or worse, they disappoint me." Beckett's heart clenched at her words. He had heard the pain in her voice before, but tonight it felt heavier. She wasn't just speaking to him, she was speaking to herself, to all the scars she carried from the past. "I get it," Beckett said, his voice low and sincere. "I think we all have reasons to guard our hearts. But I can promise you, Delilah, I'm not here to hurt you." She turned to him, her blue eyes searching his face, as if trying to read him, trying to understand the man behind the driver's uniform. But there was still something she didn't know, something he couldn't tell her. He was Ben, nothing more than the man she thought he was, if only she knew the truth. Delilah let out a deep breath, staring out at the city lights. "I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. I'm not used to it, you know?" Beckett's pulse quickened. The vulnerability in her voice cut through him like a blade. He wanted to tell her everything, that he was Beckett Hale, the millionaire who could offer her the world. But instead, he kept his mouth shut, choosing instead to be Ben, the man who had no title, no wealth. Just the man who saw her, the real her. He had seen Caroline's mask, the coldness, the lies. But with Delilah, it was different. She was raw, real, unapologetically herself. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the streetlights, Beckett felt a pull, a magnetic force that drew him closer to her. It was impossible to ignore. Delilah seemed to sense the shift in the air, the unspoken tension between them. She looked at him again, but this time it was different. There was something in her eyes, a curiosity, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. Without thinking, Beckett reached out, his hand gently touching hers. The connection was electric, sending a rush of warmth through his body. Delilah didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him, her lips trembling slightly as if she was unsure of what to do next. And then, as if by instinct, Beckett leaned forward, his heart hammering in his chest. He closed the space between them, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was nothing like the sterile, practiced kisses he'd shared with Caroline. This one was real, raw, and full of yearning. It was a kiss that spoke of all the things they hadn't said, all the emotions they hadn't dared to express. Delilah responded, her lips parting slightly, and Beckett deepened the kiss, his hand moving to cup her cheek. For a few moments, the world outside disappeared. There was no wealth, no title, no expectations. There was only them, here, in this fleeting, fragile moment, where everything felt like it could be perfect. But as quickly as it started, Beckett pulled away, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. Guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave. What had he just done? He was lying to her. He wasn't just Ben. He was Beckett Hale, the billionaire she could never trust. And yet, in that moment, he had kissed her like she was everything to him. He could never allow that to happen. He couldn't let her fall for him. He was the one who was keeping secrets, not her. Delilah blinked up at him, her chest rising and falling in time with his. She was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Beckett felt his stomach tighten. He couldn't look her in the eye. He couldn't bear to see the disappointment, the confusion that would surely follow when she learned the truth. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," Delilah said quietly, her voice filled with something he couldn't quite place. "There's something about you, Ben. Something different. I don't know what it is, but it's real." Beckett's heart clenched. He had kissed her, and now she was starting to see through the mask he had carefully built. He was lying, and it hurt more than he ever expected. "I'm just a guy," he said, his voice strained, as he pulled his hand away from hers. "I'm no one special." Delilah stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I believe that." There was a long silence, and Beckett could feel the distance between them growing, a gap he wasn't sure how to bridge. He wanted to explain, to tell her everything, But the words wouldn't come. And then, in the quiet of the car, Delilah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Beckett felt a chill run through him. She had sensed it, the secret he was desperately trying to keep from her. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I am." She looked at him, her gaze soft but questioning. "You don't have to tell me now, Ben. But one day you will, won't you?" Beckett stared at her, his heart aching. One day. But deep down, he knew that day was coming sooner than he could ever be ready for. The grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel was bathed in soft golden light, its chandeliers sparkling like diamonds. The place was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of low conversation as the city's elite gathered for Beckett Hale's highly anticipated engagement party. The scent of roses lingered in the air, mingling with the sound of a string quartet playing gently in the background. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a moment to toast the future. But Beckett felt nothing but a growing sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. Caroline, elegant as always in a silver gown that clung to her every curve, stood by his side, smiling and greeting guests. Her smile was flawless, but Beckett could see the cracks behind her eyes. It was all a performance, an act. She didn't love him. She had never loved him. And he was beginning to see how far that truth went. As the night wore on, Beckett's attention kept drifting. His eyes scanned the crowd, his mind unable to quiet the storm of questions swirling inside him. He had already heard whispers of Caroline's behavior, the way she'd been acting distant lately, the way she often seemed more interested in her own social climb than in him. But now his worst suspicions were coming to light. It was in the small moments that Beckett started to piece it together. Caroline's lingering glances at Nolan Carr, his business partner, the subtle touches between them that no one else seemed to notice. Beckett had dismissed it at first, chalking it up to his own insecurities. But tonight, everything felt different. His heart pounded in his chest when he saw them, Caroline and Nolan, slipping away from the crowd, sneaking toward the hallway that led to the private rooms. Beckett's eyes narrowed, and his gut churned as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. His worst fear was confirmed. Caroline was cheating on him. Unable to contain the surge of anger and hurt flooding his veins, Beckett excused himself from the party, moving through the crowd with swift determination. He found Caroline and Nolan in a quiet, secluded corner of the hotel, just out of view from the partygoers. Caroline's back was to him as she laughed softly at something Nolan said. The sight of them together, so comfortable, so familiar, cut Beckett to the core. Before either of them could notice him, Beckett stepped forward, his voice icy and controlled. "Carolyn." She froze and Nolan turned around, his expression unreadable. Carolyn slowly turned, a forced smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Beckett," she said, her tone too casual, as if nothing was wrong. "What are you doing here?" The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the silence. "I saw you," Beckett said, his voice low but filled with anger. "With him. Sneaking off like that. Tell me, Caroline, how long has this been going on?" Caroline's eyes flickered with something close to amusement, as if she had been expecting this moment. She crossed her arms over her chest and gave him a sharp look, her face betraying no trace of remorse. "Does it really matter, Beckett? You've always been too caught up in your own world to see it." Beckett's breath hitched as the hurt bubbled to the surface. "So, what was this all about then?" he demanded, his voice trembling with emotion. "The engagement, the lavish parties, the pictures for the press. Was it all just a game to you?" Carolyn tilted her head, a cold smile dancing on her lips. "It was never about love, Beckett. It was about status, about power. You and your family are powerful, and I wanted to be part of that world. You're the perfect man to be with. Rich, handsome, well-connected. But love?" She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I never promised you that." Beckett's world seemed to collapse in on him. His heart, once so sure and trusting, shattered into 1,000 pieces. This wasn't just betrayal, it was manipulation. Caroline had never cared about him. She had only cared about what he could give her. For a long moment, Beckett stood there, unable to find the words to express the depth of the pain coursing through him. Finally, his voice broke through the silence, raw and cutting. "I can't marry you," he said, his decision final. "Not after this. Not when everything was built on lies." Caroline's face twisted with disdain. "You're making a mistake, Beckett," she spat. "You think you can find someone better? Someone who can give you what I gave you?" Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." But Beckett didn't care. He turned on his heel, the anger and betrayal pushing him forward as he stormed out of the hallway. He needed to leave. He needed to escape the suffocating weight of the life he had been living, a life full of pretense. But before he could even reach the elevator, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a notification, a headline flashing on his screen. "Beckett Hale, billionaire, calls off wedding." The news spread faster than wildfire. Within minutes, social media was ablaze, and the tabloids were running wild with speculation. Beckett had known this would happen. The media was always hungry for drama, and his personal life was no exception. But he hadn't expected it to feel like this. A public spectacle, his most intimate heartbreak splashed across headlines. He couldn't stay. Not now. Not when everything was falling apart around him. He needed Delilah. He needed the one person who had shown him what it was like to be seen for who he truly was. Not the mask he wore every day. But even as he reached for his phone, the notifications flooded in. His past was catching up to him, and the truth about his engagement was now a public spectacle. The next morning, the world felt different to Beckett. The glittering high society, the fancy parties, the carefully curated life he had once known seemed shallow and hollow now. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had built his life around, his wealth, his power, his title, was meaningless without the one thing that had truly felt real: Delilah. But as he stood in front of the diner, the familiar neon lights flickering above him, he felt a lump form in his throat. This was it. The moment he had been dreading ever since the night he kissed her. Delilah had found out the truth. He walked in, the bell above the door chiming as he stepped into the warm, homey atmosphere. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee hit him instantly, but there was nothing comforting about it now. His heart pounded with anticipation and regret as he scanned the room, looking for her. And then he saw her, Delilah standing behind the counter, her back to him. She was wiping down the coffee machine, but there was something different about her today. Her posture was stiff, her movements mechanical. As if sensing him, she turned, her gaze meeting his. It was like a physical blow to his chest. There was no warmth in her eyes, only distance, only coldness. "Delilah," Beckett called, his voice trembling with emotion. "Can we talk?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then her eyes flicked to the floor before meeting his again, hard and unwavering. "What do you want, Beckett?" she asked, her voice as cold as ice. The use of his real name hit him like a shock. She knew. She had figured it out. He took a step closer, his heart sinking at the sight of the hurt in her eyes. "I know I lied to you," he started, his voice thick with regret. "But it wasn't like that. I didn't mean to deceive you. I wanted to see you, the real you, the person who wasn't looking at me because of my wealth or my name. I wanted to feel like a normal man for once, not a billionaire trapped in his own life." Delilah's eyes flashed with pain, and her jaw clenched. "Normal? Is that what you think you are, Beckett? You think you can just play at being Ben, pretending to be someone else, pretending to be just another guy who drives a car and listens to me talk about my day, and then suddenly decide it's real?" Her voice shook with fury, and Beckett could see the hurt behind her anger. "You used me. You used me to feel something real because you were too busy pretending in your own life. You lied to me, Beckett, and now you think you can just waltz in here and ask me to forgive you?" Beckett opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't deny it. She was right. He had lied to her, and the guilt was suffocating. "I never meant to hurt you, Delilah," he said softly, "but please just listen. I never expected to fall for you. I didn't plan it. I didn't think I'd ever feel like this, like I couldn't live without you." She shook her head, taking a step back, the pain evident in her eyes. "You don't get it, do you, Beckett?" she said, her voice raw. "You don't get to pretend to be poor, to pretend to be someone you're not just to feel something real. That's not how it works. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to take my heart too." Her words cut deep, and Beckett staggered backward as if she had physically struck him. "I didn't mean to," he started, but she cut him off. "You lied to me," Delilah repeated, her voice quieter now, but filled with so much pain. "You made me trust you. You made me believe that there was something real between us, and now you've destroyed it." She paused, wiping away a stray tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I can't forgive you for that." Beckett's chest tightened, his heart breaking as the truth of her words sank in. He had never been the kind of man who needed to rely on anyone else, but now, standing here in front of Delilah, he realized just how much he had come to depend on her. Her warmth, her kindness, the way she had made him feel seen and heard in a way no one ever had before. "Delilah, please," Beckett begged, his voice raw with desperation. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear I never wanted to lose you." But Delilah, her face a mixture of sorrow and anger, simply shook her head. "You've already lost me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're too late." With that, she turned away from him, her footsteps echoing on the diner's worn wooden floors as she walked toward the back. Beckett stood frozen, his mind racing, his heart shattering with every step she took away from him. He wanted to follow her, to tell her everything, to beg for forgiveness. But he knew it was too late. Delilah had already made up her mind. She was done. Beckett's legs felt weak beneath him, and he stumbled toward the door. The cool night air hit him like a slap to the face as he stepped outside, the world around him spinning. He had lost her. Not just Delilah, but the only real thing he had ever found in his life. His only chance at something genuine, something worth fighting for. As the cold wind bit at his skin, Beckett couldn't help but feel the weight of his own betrayal. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. The one person who had ever truly seen him, who had shown him what love could be, was slipping away, and he had no idea how to get her back. The days after Delilah walked away from him felt like a blur of numbness. Beckett Hale, the man who had once dominated every room he entered, now found himself sinking into a silence he couldn't escape. His usual confident stride faltered as he spent his days trapped in a self-imposed exile from the world. He canceled public appearances, one after another. The gala invitations piled up in his office ignored. He didn't have the energy for the photo ops, the fake smiles, or the endless questions about his personal life. His public persona, once meticulously crafted, crumbled beneath the weight of his guilt. Business deals, once his lifeblood, began to fall apart. Clients who relied on his influence and expertise were left hanging, unable to reach him. The company that had once thrived under his leadership started to falter, and Beckett didn't care. He no longer cared about anything except the empty space where Delilah had once been. The nights were the hardest. He found himself staring out the large windows of his penthouse, watching the twinkling city lights below, yet feeling more isolated than he ever had in his life. New York, the city that never slept, now felt like a ghost town to him. The only thing that kept him going was the work he had secretly thrown himself into, an act of love and regret. Beckett had set up a charity in Delilah's mother's name, a quiet tribute to the woman who had shaped the woman he had fallen for. The foundation would provide scholarships for students in need, just like Delilah had once been. But he hadn't stopped there. In secret, he had also arranged for a college scholarship for Delilah's younger sister Lily, the girl who had put her own dreams on hold to care for her family. It wasn't much, Beckett knew, but it was the only way he could give back, without asking for forgiveness, without expecting anything in return. It was his way of making things right. Delilah, on the other hand, was trying to move on. But no matter how much she tried to bury the memories of Beckett, of Ben, they kept resurfacing. It wasn't just the kiss, or the quiet rides, or the stolen moments of connection that lingered in her mind. It was the way he had made her feel alive, the way he had made her believe in something real. But that was over now. He had lied, and even though her heart ached, Delilah refused to let herself fall back into the trap of trusting him again. It was her sister Lily who first gave her a clue about the anonymous benefactor. Lily had come to her one evening, her eyes wide with wonder. "Delilah, you won't believe this. Someone's been helping us, paying for my college tuition, the textbooks, even my applications to other schools." She held up a letter with the scholarship details. "It's all in Mom's name, too." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. There was only one person she knew who would have done something like this. The same person who had shown her a love that had felt real, only to destroy it with lies. Beckett. At first she refused to believe it. How could it be him? After everything he had done, everything she had said, how could he still care? But as she stared at the letter in her hands, the truth began to sink in. Beckett's love had never been fake. It had simply been hidden beneath layers of guilt and confusion. His gesture wasn't about redemption. It was about love, the kind of love he couldn't express in words. Delilah sat down, the weight of it all crashing over her. She could feel the anger and the sadness mixing with something else, something softer. She had spent so long telling herself that she hated him for what he had done, but now she wasn't so sure. Beckett had loved her, and in his own way he was still trying to make things right. But was it enough? Her heart waged a battle she couldn't control. Every moment that passed without him felt like a constant ache, a dull pain in her chest. But was she ready to forgive him? To let him back into her life after everything? Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts, but one thing was clear. She couldn't just pretend that she didn't still care. No matter how hard she tried, Beckett's love had left a mark on her soul, a mark she couldn't erase. Meanwhile, Beckett continued to work silently, never seeking recognition, never asking for anything in return. He knew that the chances of Delilah forgiving him were slim, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to do this. For her family, and for the love he had lost. He had thought that calling off his engagement to Caroline would set him free, but in truth it had only left him more trapped than ever. He had no answers, no way to fix the mess he had created. All he could do was wait and hope that one day Delilah might understand that he had never meant to hurt her. For now he could only sit in the silence of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, wondering if he would ever be able to find his way back to her. Delilah had spent the days following her realization about Beckett in a state of turmoil. Her heart swirled with conflicting emotions, anger, longing, confusion, each one taking turns in her chest, making her question everything she thought she knew about love and trust. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the memory of him, his smile, his warmth, the way he had made her feel like she mattered. It was too much to forget. It was late one afternoon when she decided to confront him. The city was quieter than usual, with the late autumn chill settling over the streets. As she walked through the park, the familiar bench caught her eye. It was the same bench where Beckett, disguised as Ben, had taken her that day they shared coffee. The same bench where they had laughed, talked about their hopes and dreams, and shared a connection so real it had burned in her chest. That bench had been a symbol of something pure, something untouched by the world of wealth and expectations. Beckett was sitting there, his back hunched, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by the man she remembered, the man she had fallen for. His eyes were tired, haunted. He hadn't noticed her approach, and for a moment, Delilah stood there, watching him from the distance, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated, unsure of what to say, but she knew she had to do this, for herself, for the love that still lingered between them, no matter how much they had been hurt. "Beckett," she called softly, her voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes widening with surprise. The moment he saw her, a flicker of hope passed through his gaze, but it quickly faded into something darker, a mixture of guilt and fear. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Delilah stepped closer, standing just a few feet away from him. She crossed her arms over her chest, her fingers digging into the fabric of her coat. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she couldn't just stand there and pretend like everything was okay. "You look surprised to see me," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You thought I wouldn't come back." Beckett stood up slowly, as if he was unsure whether she was real or just another one of his broken dreams. His face was drawn, his blue eyes wide with both fear and longing. Delilah, I, I didn't know if you would ever want to see me again after everything. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. I don't know what to think anymore. You lied to me. You were hiding who you really were the entire time, Beckett. But, she paused, her voice faltering, I'm not here to yell at you. He took a tentative step forward, his gaze locked onto hers. Then why are you here? Delilah's heart beat faster, the emotions inside her swirling like a storm. I'm here because I need to understand. I need to know why you couldn't just tell me the truth. Why you had to pretend to be someone else. Why couldn't you trust me, Beckett? The words were raw, cutting through the air like sharp blades. She wasn't angry, not anymore, but the hurt still lingered. She could see the way his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with regret. Beckett let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as he sat back down on the bench. He gestured for her to join him, and Delilah reluctantly sat down beside him. The distance between them felt so far yet so close at the same time. Neither one of them spoke for a long while, just listening to the soft rustle of the leaves and the distant hum of the city around them. Finally, Beckett spoke, his voice low and heavy with guilt. I was afraid, he admitted, his words barely above a whisper. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd only love me for what I could give you. For the money, the status, everything I've worked so hard to build. I didn't think you could love me for me. Not really. Not the way I loved you. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected to hear those words from him. The vulnerability in his voice sent a jolt of emotion through her heart. Beckett, she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. I loved you when you were just Ben. That was real. The person I fell for, the person I cared about, was the man who listened to me, who made me feel seen, not the billionaire, not the man with all the answers. You could have told me the truth. I would have understood. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. I loved you then, she repeated, and I still do. Beckett's eyes filled with unshed tears as he reached out to her, his hand trembling as he cupped her face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry for lying to you. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just scared. Delilah closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean into his touch, feeling the warmth of his hand on her skin. She had wanted to stay angry. She had wanted to keep him at arm's length for everything he had done. But in that moment, she realized that her heart couldn't carry that burden anymore. I forgive you, Beckett, she said, her voice barely audible, but filled with sincerity. I've been holding on to so much pain, but I can't anymore. I love you. I always have. Beckett's breath caught in his throat as he pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid to let go. He had never felt this vulnerable, this raw, in his entire life. But in her arms he found solace. The truth was out. The lies had been exposed. And in the quiet of that moment, there was only them. No wealth, no status, just two people who had found each other against all odds. I love you, Delilah, he murmured against her hair. I've always loved you. And for the first time in months, Delilah allowed herself to believe it. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his embrace fill the empty spaces in her heart. There was no more pretending, no more secrets, just love, real love. The world around them faded away as they sat together on that bench, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally free to be who they truly were, together. The city had always been full of noise, the blaring horns, the rushing footsteps, the constant hum of life in motion. But now it felt different, quieter somehow, more meaningful. Beckett had always believed that wealth defined success, that the size of one's bank account reflected the depth of their happiness. He had lived his life in the glaring spotlight of luxury, surrounded by people who admired his wealth, envied his power, and revered his name. But now, as he sat in the modest kitchen of their new home, his hand wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, Delilah humming softly as she flipped pancakes on the stove, he realized how far removed he had been from what truly mattered. The house they had chosen was small, but it was warm. It had none of the grandiose chandeliers or the opulent furniture of his former mansions. Instead, it had cozy corners, mismatched furniture, and a kitchen that always smelled of fresh coffee in the occasional batch of Delilah's homemade cookies. It was a far cry from the polished penthouses and luxury suites he had once occupied, but in its simplicity, Beckett found peace. Delilah, with her wild blonde hair and sparkling smile, had become his world. She was his home, his safe place. She taught him that love wasn't about the grand gestures or the expensive gifts. It was about the quiet moments shared over breakfast, the lazy Sunday afternoons spent on the couch with a book in hand, and the way her eyes lit up whenever they talked about the future. Together, they had built something real, something far richer than any bank account could hold. But despite the tranquility of their new life, Beckett knew he wasn't finished. There was still more he had to do. He couldn't ignore the people who needed help, the causes he had once overlooked in his pursuit of wealth. It was time to make a difference, to use his resources for something greater than himself. And so he founded the Rose Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping at-risk youth, providing scholarships, and creating opportunities for those who had been forgotten by society. Delilah, of course, was by his side every step of the way. She was more than just the woman he loved. She was his partner, his equal, and the driving force behind everything they did. The foundation's grand opening was an event filled with emotion, with speeches and cheers from those whose lives had already been touched by their efforts. The night was a celebration of not just their success, but the future they were building together. As Beckett stood before the crowd, his heart full, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had once thought that the only way to feel fulfilled was through wealth and status, but now he knew the truth. Fulfillment came from the impact you had on the world, the love you shared, and the people you helped along the way. As the event began to wind down, Beckett glanced at Delilah across the room. She was talking to some of the attendees, her face lighting up with excitement as she shared her vision for the foundation. For a moment, he just watched her, the woman who had stolen his heart in ways he never thought possible. She wasn't the glamorous, polished woman from his past. She wasn't interested in high society or the trappings of wealth. She was authentic, raw, and beautiful in ways he couldn't have imagined. And that was exactly why he had fallen in love with her. He stepped away from the crowd and made his way toward her, a small box hidden in his pocket. His heart beat faster with each step. This wasn't going to be like the grand proposal he had once planned with Caroline. No, this was going to be simple, intimate, real. Delilah noticed him coming and gave him that smile, the smile that always made his chest tighten with love. He stopped in front of her, feeling the weight of the moment. "Delilah," he began, his voice soft but firm, "when I first met you, I thought I knew what I wanted out of life. I thought money could buy me everything. But you showed me a different way. You showed me that love isn't about what you have. It's about who you are and who you choose to be with." Delilah's eyes softened, a tear threatening to spill down her cheek. She hadn't expected this, and she certainly hadn't expected him to be so open, so vulnerable. He smiled at her, pulling the small box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple gold ring. It wasn't a diamond the size of a golf ball, nor did it sparkle under the lights like some extravagant piece of jewelry. It was a plain, unadorned band, but on the inside it was engraved with a single word: forever. "I don't need diamonds," Beckett continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't need the world's approval. All I need is you. Will you marry me, Delilah? Will you be my forever?" Delilah's hand trembled as she took the ring, her eyes brimming with tears. For a moment she couldn't speak, her heart racing as she realized just how far they had come. From their first meeting, to the secrets, the heartbreak, and now to this moment of pure, unfiltered love. This wasn't a love built on lies or pretenses. It was a love forged in truth, in shared dreams, and in the simplest of moments. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Yes, I will." The crowd around them cheered, but Beckett only had eyes for her. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world could have been watching, but all that mattered was the woman standing before him, his Delilah, the love of his life. As he slid the ring onto her finger, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. The years of searching, the years of pretending, the years of loneliness, they all melted away in the warmth of her embrace. In that moment, Beckett knew that this was just the beginning, the real beginning, because sometimes the richest hearts are hidden behind the simplest disguises, and his heart had always been hers.